Hello, everyone listening to the podcast, and welcome to Career Chats, a podcast featuring media professionals, allowing them to share their experiences and giving advice to college students pursuing careers in media. I am the host, Ronni Butts. I am a sophomore political science and mass communication student from North Carolina Central University. And today I have my very first podcast guest, Don Baumgartner Vaughan, reporter at the News and Observer. So thank you so much for being here, taking your time out of your day. So just to give a brief overview of who Don is a reporter at the News and Observer, serving as the state Capitol Bureau Chief, reporting on the North Carolina State Legislature most of the time. But you've had an extensive career reporting, working at the News and Observer, the Herald Sun, and the Roanoke Times. So again, thank you so much for taking your time to be here and to share your experiences with some college students.
Thanks for having me.
So we met a few months ago at RDU Airport, interestingly enough, at a press pool for the Harris Walls campaign. And that was my very first time ever reporting in a press pool, going somewhere, on my own. That's not just in my car. And so I remember turning to you and asking, I've never done this before. Can you give me some advice? And so what you told me was really helpful. So I wanted to make sure I asked you to be on the podcast. I know that you could have some insightful advice to give for some other college students. So the first question I wanted to ask you is really a personal question, just thinking back to your childhood, maybe high school, middle school. What were your original career goals? Was it reporting?
Yeah, pretty much. So I was an Army brat as a kid, and then went to middle school and high school in Northern Virginia. And just being in that DC area, you really can't escape like the news, I guess, like living in the DC area. And I like the idea of writing when I was a kid, and I thought, well, you can't just, I mean, some people just say they're going to write a book and then they write a book and they're a famous author. It doesn't always work out that way. And I thought, well, maybe newspapers or reporting is like, another way to write creatively. And then I really lucked out. The high school I went to in Fairfax County, Virginia, had a journalism class we could take. I took 3 years of it, like different levels of it. And this is back when I don't even know if high school papers still like have any sort of print product, but we had like a little printing press in our journalism classroom,
Wow.
and we came out every 2 weeks, and it was really like fun and a chance to learn from our journalism teacher, Dr. McCarthy. So I'll shout him out for high school journalism teachers. And I just did different things over the years there. They had like the students do all the production stuff. And 1 year I was the business manager, which was basically just like mailing bills to advertisers and keeping track of that, and then writing stories and everything. And it was just really fun. So I decided I wanted to major in it in college. I went to Virginia Tech, which for the public schools in Virginia, that's the only school that had a communications journalism major. So I went there for that, and I ended up actually not getting my degree in journalism. My degree's in history, because I decided I was going to do 2 degrees and a political science minor. In the end, it was like I have the classes and the grades for history, so that's what my actual degree's in. But I took all the journalism classes in college, and I worked at the Collegiate Times, the student newspaper there. So yeah, so I am actually doing, not everybody does that. A lot of people don't, you're well into your 20s, 30s, older before you really, feel like you're doing what you want to do. But I'm like actually one of those cases that I really wanted to do this, and I've been lucky to be able to do this my whole career.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't expect you to say you had a degree in history. So
It
you said you worked at the Collegiate Times at Virginia Tech. So what was that like working for the student paper?
was pretty cool. And honestly, I'm trying to remember like how, like anything, like when you're freshman year, there's like, come check this out for an interest meeting or something. And so I had signed up to be a reporter. And then, so I wrote a couple stories. I remember writing about this local cemetery, and it was actually like a local history story, which is funny since I ended up getting like my degree in history. I remember doing a story about um, what it was like for like 18-year-olds to have credit cards, and just kind of dealing with suddenly having a credit card. And it was pretty cool. I got to know the town a little bit in Blacksburg, and then just maybe different parts of campus more. And I liked features, so that's most of what I did. And then maybe after a year or so of that, I had heard like they were like hiring the actual, like I was a reporter. You're just a thing you do as a student, like a club, but it's not. They would actually pay you a little bit if you were on the Collegiate Times staff. And so I did that. I was an assistant editor in features, and I was an associate editor. And the assistant editor job was basically I would go into the office on Sundays and call reporters and try to assign stories. And if they didn't want to do it, if I couldn't find anyone to do it, then like I wrote the stories. So I wrote a lot of stories. And then I went to associate, and then that was page design because we had a print product, and I didn't really like it. I learned like I didn't like design. I liked the actual like reporting, and still felt that way later in my jobs, where they would be like, "Oh, do you want to do any of the design?" I'm like, "Not really. I have thoughts about design, but like I tested it out and was like, no, this isn't for me," which was good because I wouldn't have known unless I had like done that at the student newspaper, like what I really did like doing with journalism and what I didn't do. So it was pretty good hands-on stuff.
Right. So, aside from writing for the Collegiate Times, what were some other things that you did in college to help prepare you for a career in reporting? Did you maybe do any internships? Did you work over the summer?
I actually didn't have an internship. So, like, I remember a lot of pressure for them. And it's okay if you don't have it. It's great if you do. It gets you in the door. But I thought, like, working at the Collegiate Times was fine. I had like other part-time jobs. And like I'd mentioned, like I added more. I decided I was going to get degree in communications and a degree in history and a political science minor. It was too much. Like I think like anybody when you're between 18 and 21, 22, it's really stressful. You're figuring out what you want to do. Um, and so I stuck with the CT even when there was a time where I didn't like it as much. Like when I mentioned that page design, I'm like, well, this is helpful and I'm working here. And so right before I had to take one more class before I actually got my degree, which ended up being an independent study. But so I had applied at the local paper in town, like this really small community paper, and they wanted for a part-time job, only like 10 hours a week. And I didn't have any internships when I was applying. I had, my work at the student newspaper. I had done one freelance story for the Roanoke Times, which is like the big metro paper nearby there, which maybe that helped me get a job at the Roanoke Times later. But I did like one freelance story for them. And anyway, so I got hired as a part-time features writer for this local paper called the News Messenger in Christiansburg. And I ended up staying there for 3 years because, like, a year later, and after I graduated, I worked there full time. And then that helped me get my next full time job, which, like, a little bit of a bigger community paper. And then I got my Roanoke Times job after that. So it was kind of more of like on the job, like trench in the trenches learning, which was really helpful. I had some really good editors who had spent a lot of small papers. You'll see, like some turnover with the younger, which I ended up being one myself. You're in your early 20s and just work there for a couple of years and leave. But then there'd be other staff that spent their whole career there. And they were really good mentors to me. And I learned, like, how do I cover a town council meeting? Like how to just everything. I learned photography, like all of that was on the job. They didn't have a photography class at Virginia Tech. I would have taken one. I took one in high school, so that was helpful. Um, but yeah, so it was really kind of on the job. The pay was pretty bad, but I made it through eventually to get to other jobs. And I always had a part-time job too, just doing something.
So now that you're at the News and Observer, you're at the biggest newspaper in North Carolina. So that's been a really big jump from those community papers all those years ago. So walk me through your average day-to-day reporting at the News and Observer. What's that like?
Well, a lot of our job, like the whole pandemic, changed a lot of things about a lot of jobs, a lot of white collar jobs, and newspapers and media are the same. Our jobs, like to do actual reporting, you need to you need to be there in the field. But a lot of the other ends, like maybe editors aren't, there's not like a busy newsroom as much as there was earlier in my career. So a little bit of that has changed. So it really, like, my day will start. We have a remote meeting at 8:45 in the morning. And sometimes since I cover the legislature, we're like, by the time there's that meeting, that all staff meeting, we're already at the legislative building covering a committee. So our jobs are like, we just, when the legislature's in session, it's first thing in the morning, we're already downtown, wearing a blazer. It's like, because you're in this, political world, and there's like a series of committee meetings. So we'll sort out who's covering what. My job as Capitol Bureau Chief is to really just be there in the building and sort out how we're covering everything, and to help our politics editor to sort of streamline that process. And I'll edit occasionally if needed, kind of backup if we have a lot of stuff going on, because it can go from, like, nothing's going on, you cover a committee meeting, maybe it's worth writing about, maybe it's not, to a whole bunch of things at once, where the House is in session at the same time the Senate is in session, and say there's a protest outside or a protest in the building, and they're not just passing one bill, they're passing five, and just to sort all of that out. So sometimes it's like this really intense, busy time, and then sometimes it's a slower time. Like on Mondays and Fridays are more flexible for us. I'm on the PBS Dateline show sometimes. We'll do other media appearances and PR and that sort of thing, where we talk about what else has been going on. We have meetings like any sort of office job. You have staff meetings, planning meetings. Our politics team meets twice a week. I meet with my editor once a week. I'm part of these meetings that the editors have that are planning. So I go to that to find out what's going on. And that's kind of a mix of like in person and remote, depending on what other people do. So today, as we're recording this, I started my day. I live in Raleigh. I started my day in Durham at American Tobacco at a child care center there, because one of my main beats is covering Governor Josh Stein, and he was making an announcement there and touring the child care center. So I went to that. I met up with our photographer, who we kind of coordinated already on like Sunday night, Monday morning, like how, was I going to go? Is it writing about? And so that was my day. And then from there, I drove to our newsroom in downtown Raleigh. And obviously, I'm doing this right now. And then we have our team meeting later today, and I'll be working on writing up my assignment this morning. So it's a little bit different when it's legislature versus kind of off days, where you're either working on a longer term project and you can make your own schedule that day, versus when it's something like, laws are being passed, and like this is what bills are being passed. And it's more of a crazy day to day.
So, in addition to you reporting at the legislature and writing articles, you also serve the News and Observer in several different kinds of media. You have the Under the Dome podcast. And for the listeners that don't know what Under the Dome is, it's a podcast that helps explain North Carolina current events and what's happening in the legislature, hosted by you, and features some other members of the politics team. And so you also have a newsletter to go along with that. And so what made you want to add on Under the Dome to your workload there at the News and Observer?
That kind of came out where, like, the podcast has been something the politics team has done for a long time, and we've rearranged it every now and then depending on who's our current team or what we want to do. And we had, like, a couple of years ago, we had sort of rotating where we would take turns hosting, and like the scheduling and logistics became more difficult. And our producer had asked if I would be the regular host, and then so the responsibility would be mine to plan exactly when we're recording and what we're going to talk about, and do those kind of logistical things, and then decide who from the team is available, coordinate that sort of thing. So we've been doing that for a year, 2 years now, I'm thinking, and it's worked out pretty well. And comes out once a week. And I'll have maybe once a month or so, I'll have a guest. And that has been, most recently, it was the new labor commissioner. But I've had lawmakers, I've had people that aren't on the politics team. It's a politics podcast, so that's what people want to hear. But sometimes there's crossover. Like I had our business and tech reporter Brian Gordon on a couple of weeks ago because he's written about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and there's a bill in the legislature about cryptocurrency. So I'm like, well, why don't we have the tech reporter come on and explain this? I've had local reporters come on because of the state local government crossover there. And it's fun. It's only about 20 minutes, which we figured is there's something about the average commute is 22 minutes long. So if we stick to around that, that's the perfect time for people to listen on their drive. I've heard from people who are like lawmakers who, their districts are far from Raleigh. They'll listen to it on their way into town to catch up and that sort of thing. So that's our timing. There are other politics podcasts. There's one lobbyists do that's like an hour. So it kind of just depends. Everybody's different as far as what they want to listen to. So yeah, so it just kind of happened. Like a lot of our jobs, a lot of jobs, like you kind of things shift along as you go. Newsletters became something that was really important to the News and Observer and our room by McClatchy. And I started one which was just focusing on the governor's race because that got so much attention in 2024, and we've kind of kept that on for a while since Stein is still new. We have just a variety of like the people on our politics team, the other reporters, and a couple of freelancers to decide like each day, like what should we put in that and get everything together. So we're all a part of the newsletters, and I actually put out the podcast as a newsletter too.
So speaking of other forms of media, like you said before, you also sometimes are on the PBS NC State lines. And so also for the viewers that may not know, is a program on PBS that again discusses North Carolina politics, and it features reporters, policy analysts, elected officials, and they help, clarify the viewers' understanding of what's going on in politics in North Carolina. And so for you, who usually is someone that's behind the recorder, maybe even behind the camera, asking questions. What is it like for you to be in front of the camera sometimes? And, your face is there, you may be sharing what you've been learning about while at the House or Senate. So what is it like being in front of the camera?
Yeah, so it's been a change. Like I've politics is like because there's so many different media with politics. I'd say politics and sports are kind of similar to that with journalism versus maybe other things. Probably the first time I was ever on TV, I'm sure I wasn't very good. You end up having to learn and really being on the radio more times. I've been on different, NPR shows. I'm on WUNC Due South pretty regularly too, but it took time to learn how to make sure I'm speaking clearly on air, to fill space if I need to. And I feel like I got better at that. And that's why I ended up being better as the podcast host. But really, like the first few times, I'm sure like I stumbled a lot. And TV, it's like I have to remember to sit up straight. That's something where it's a funny thing that like if you're not on camera and you're a reporter, you're hunched over your computer or your phone, and realizing if you're sitting at a table on camera, you need to sit up straight. So weird little things like that if any of your listeners that work in TV media, you already know that, right? That's part of your training or class. But if you're not, you don't. And you have to think about how everything is such short time. Like, so when I'm on state lines, they have that recording is 26 minutes long, and they'll kind of have the host will have a script, and they'll say, we're going to talk about this. And then Dawn, I'm going to ask you a question, or they ask like the other person a question. So we kind of know what we're going to say, but it's also just one take. So you got to get it out there. And if you realize you make a mistake, you just correct yourself, as you say it. But I've done some things virtually. I was on Meet the Press Now during the gubernatorial campaign with Kristen Welker. That was really cool because I'm a fan of her. So that was neat. And that was just, on camera segment. And there's different production stuff where like big, NBC obviously has like a huge staff, and the producers will contact you and they'll say, okay, you need to sign up at this time. And then we like check this audio. And if you're there in a studio somewhere, it's a little bit different, making sure like my hair looks okay and my makeup looks okay, that you do yourself, which maybe you didn't think about as much when you're not on camera. And I'll send my mom the link and she'll be like, oh, you need to like sit up straight and smile more, that sort of thing. Typical stuff like your parents tell you to do.
So, since we're talking about the several forms of media you create, we're talking about mass communication students. At North Carolina Central, we don't have a journalism major, we have mass communication. So there's several concentrations within that, PR, journalism, broadcast media, and there may be a few others. But students are often encouraged to get themselves out there and to try different forms of media. So writing for the Campus Echo newspaper or reporting for the Central News Station or being on audio net, their radio broadcast. And so as someone that participates in several different forms of media, what would you say to students who are maybe afraid of branching out and stepping into different fields? Would you encourage them to stick to one thing or to try it all?
Yeah, I really think you should try it. Don't think that you want to be just one. Like I was saying when I started my career, I liked feature stories, and I did that for a long time. When I worked at the Durham Herald Sun, I was a features writer for 10 years and then moved to local government and then state politics like the past 6 years. Totally different type of work, but like you do something as long as you enjoy it, try something else. And if you figure out, well, this isn't for me, or you might be like, oh, wow, like I really like the idea of TV or radio, or no, I'd rather just write. Or maybe you do all of it, just like a different amounts. But I'd say, like, just if you get an opportunity and someone's like, hey, do you want to come check this out or try it out? Even if you think you may not like it, just try it. And it's okay to stumble. Like, people have done like everyone at all aspects of things, all levels of government and power and age, everything, people make mistakes. I still remember at my first job, I was standing in the back of a town council meeting and I leaned against the wall and I turned the light like literally. So I'm like 23 and and then all these like it's the mayor and the council and I was just leaning against the wall and turning the light off and I didn't even realize that I was the one that did it until the literal town manager said, Dawn, you're leaning on the light switch. And it was so embarrassing. But I just laughed it off and it was fine. And so everybody does that. So if you screw up, it's okay because like everyone does. And if people criticize you for it, whatever, nobody's perfect. It's worth trying it.
So getting back to some more college focused questions as well. So I've noticed while being a student at NCCU, they encourage students to, get out there, get into your desired field, go do internships, go shadow. But I've noticed that a lot of students may be a bit apprehensive with doing that. People may just want to, go to class, go back to their room, and, are scared to put themselves out there. So what do you say for media students that are feeling that way?
Um, take time to yourself that you need to. Like it's funny, like a lot of people in media are introverts and they like that your job kind of makes you a little more extroverted. I feel like I'm definitely an extrovert. I like going to stuff, I like checking things out, but not always. Sometimes you're just tired and you don't want to like be all in everything every day. And it's okay. So like have your days or, evening, morning, just be like, I'm not up for this today. Obviously, if it's your job, they don't care if you have to go every day. But if it's something else, that's like you don't need to have to do that moment. Like maybe things will be different. Or two that like I always hear that advice for do just like the very next thing. So if you have like this big overwhelming list of things you have to do, or people you need to call, or emails you need to send, just send the one email and then see and just think about like what's right in front of you. And most of the time, like you're not probably not going to regret. Like any college student, you're like, do I want to stay in this weekend? Do I want to go out? And sometimes you go out and it wasn't great, but sometimes you stayed in and everyone else went out and had fun and you've got FOMO from that. So just try. But if you're like all of us have times where like you don't always want to be on. And if you have the ability to just like take some time for yourself whenever, then you should do that too. I mean, literally touch grass, like not just like the figures of speech, but just go outside and get away, for a little bit and then see if that kind of changes your mindset or your motivation or whatever.
Definitely. So, another question I wanted to ask is about making connections. So once I got to college, myself and I know several other students have heard from professors, administrators, maybe mentors, make connections, go network, go and meet some people. And so it's constantly pushed to make sure you are staying connected, whether it be through LinkedIn or going to the career fair or different events like that. And so I'm sure as a reporter, making those connections is very important for you with maybe getting insights or getting interviews. Could you explain how what the importance is of making connections as a reporter?
Yeah, it's hard when somebody just says, go do this. And then you're like, well, how do I do that? Because you don't want to appear phony, like you're only talking to someone for what, it's if the more you're out there, the more things will come up. Like when even like in the legislative building, if you're just like, instead of just staying in the press room, if I'm walking around the building or riding the elevator, in line at the cafeteria, it's just like talking to people, like where it's natural, be like, oh, there's so and so. And you just go up and say, like, hi, introduce yourself. And it's like kind of that one exchange. So that way it kind of just like it's sort of happenstance that you came across each other, or maybe you knew someone was there was some sort of event and a networking event, but there's going to be awkward moments. I've definitely had the thing about being a reporter is like you show up at a place, you kind of scope out the scene and then decide like, you're observing for your reporting purposes and everything is kind of like that. But so you just kind of have to make yourself like just like walk up to if there's like, a table with like water and snacks, go over there, say hello to the person next to you and talk. And maybe that time didn't work out. Maybe the next time you go to something, someone will say, oh, I recognize you from this last thing, or you have like something in common. So it's really just a series of like little interactions that can kind of build things up where you see someone like the way you and I met on an assignment, where
Right.
you're just like thrown into this, this thing, and then you talk to someone because it's like what works out, like, what's going on. It was logistics, I remember, where all of a sudden we show up and the event was at a school and there's like two different, it's like, it was kind of chaotic where there's like the reporters that were on site versus the pool reporters. And how do we figure out where we're gonna go and covering an event like this, and it's really just sort of those like in the moment interaction. So really the more you go out and do things, the more that'll come up naturally. You can also just contact someone directly, and sometimes people like email them or whatever, and or comment on social media or something. And then I've probably met people from, but when Twitter was more what Twitter used to be, just following people, follow back that way. And then you interact. I've had sources that have worked out well from that. The people end up seeing like your social media presence and then know a little bit something about you. So it might be more likely to come up to you to interact with you in another way. So it's really like a variety of things. It's not just like one thing that is going to be what you should do. So go to stuff, interact with other people, say hello, and then like so that sort of builds up over time, I think.
So when we're talking about students, getting out there, making connections, a big part of that is, working and getting internship experience or volunteering at newspapers. And so maybe you've had experience with interns at your previous publications, and I know you've had experiences with them at the News and Observer. And so, what are some things that you see them do? Maybe some good things, maybe some mistakes that they make just as students, they may not know what to do. What are some things that you see that you would maybe encourage college students to do or warn them against?
I would say it ends up becoming clear if somebody ends up taking an internship that they didn't really want, and like that comes through in your job, that maybe it was something, it wasn't your first choice, or you're not doing exactly like that'll come through, and people will immediately be like, okay, you're here for a couple months, we're here to help you, you're here to help us, but if you're not interested, then like, so don't do something just to check it off your list if you're not like actually interested in it. We've had a lot of really great interns here that I don't know has a lot. Like we'll have several every summer. When I was at the Herald Sun, we'd probably have like maybe like one or two, and really like the best, what'll work best for you as an intern would be to say like, sure, yeah, I'm up for it. When someone's like, does anyone want to go do this? Any sort of on the job stuff, kind of like what I was saying when I had that first part-time newspaper job, and I was just thrown into everything. But I was more or less like an intern's age or immediately, after. And you really learn by doing in a lot of ways. I'd say take advantage of the people that you meet in a newsroom, not just, how do you think I should do this assignment, but talk to them, like eat lunch with them, like go get coffee. If there's a question you had, we've had some interns here who it's sort of in line with different teams, like they're the Metro intern or the politics intern or the sports intern or the photo intern. If you're interested in something different than what you were assigned, then like offer to help. Like our newsletter, one of our freelancers helping with our newsletter, she was an intern not on the politics team, but is now helping us with the politics newsletter because she was interested and said like, oh, can I help? And I'd like to do this too. So really, if someone offers, just like I was saying before, like just check it out, like say yes and see how it goes. Because again, you'll also learn, wow, I really like doing this, or I don't like doing this, or I want to try something else. But really just kind of bring that enthusiasm and are willing to like just to try something. And it's okay if you fail. I mean, like because you're learning, there are other people there that'll pick you up.
The final question I have for you today is, what is your most memorable experience so far being a reporter? That may be a tough one.
Yeah. Um, Gosh, I don't know. Memorable, like in a good way or a bad way.
It could be
So
either.
I'll do the negative one first. So I covered the governor's race in 2024. People paid attention. It was this is the most recent memorable. The Republican candidate Mark Robinson ended up losing, and he had a big national scandal and everything. And I still had to cover him. And I was talking to him at a campaign event in the parking lot of a Dollar General. And he started yelling at me over in Hillsborough, and yelling at me over questioning all his, like a bunch of his staff had just quit. And I was asking about that. And you always say things very politely and professionally. And he was kind of like very unhappy with the questioning and just having to not react. Like, because people will, insult you publicly, come at you, and you just have to stay professional. So that was a recent memorable moment of like, wow, sometimes this job is not great, something that was, I've done a lot of cool stuff. Like I covered, if the central students listening to this, I covered Durham for so long. And when I did features, I would get to review the Broadway shows at DPAC. And that was really cool, like cover festivals and that sort of thing. But I did a story once on, I would write about documentaries and everything too. So the Duke Chapel custodian was in a documentary about what the jobs were like of custodians at these big, like Ivy League, like ish, universities. So I just did a feature story. I'm talking to him. It's Oscar Dantzler. He's really, really cool. And one of the good things about the interview that I remember is he said how he went fishing but didn't like to eat fish. So that's like just a funny thing from an interview that I haven't forgotten. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. But the coolest thing is that he knows everything about that building. And he took me up the tiny little elevator to the top of Duke Chapel. And I don't like heights that much. So, but I said yes, like when we were talking about trying stuff. And it was so cool. You could see, of course, all of Durham from there. You could even see a little bit of downtown Raleigh from being up that high. And it was all just because I interviewed someone that has this really cool job with access. And he said, do you want to go, to the top? And I held on tight to the railings, but that was really just this moment of like, wow, I'm really lucky. I have a really cool job and just getting to meet people and tell their stories. And that was really fun. That was really fun.
Well, that's awesome. So thank you so much again for meeting with me today. Everyone, this is Career Chats with Ronnie Butts, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for having me.